Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulullah. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. May peace be upon you. This is Edward Ahmed Mitchell, the National Deputy Director of the Council on American-Islamic Relations. Thank you for joining us this morning. We are here today to announce to you the results of our final 2024 election survey of American Muslim voters. As you all know, CAIR is part of our mission, tries to keep track of how the American Muslim community is viewing every election, dating back to 2020, 2016, 2012, 2008. We want to make sure we're assessing where American Muslims stand, what issues are important to them, and how they plan to vote. Throughout this election season, we've been surveying American Muslim voters. Our last survey was in August of this year. As you all may recall, that survey showed that in the presidential race, Kamala Harris and Jill Stein were about tied at 29%. Donald Trump was back at 11%. Today, we'll be releasing the results of our final survey and letting you know where American Muslims stand as Election Day approaches. I want to thank Robert McCall, Government Affairs Director, and his entire team for all the work they've done to put these surveys together, as well as our outside vendors done an excellent job making sure this is a top-notch poll. Without any further ado, no drum roll involved. I'm going to turn over to Robert McCall to share with us the results of today's final 2024 election survey of American Muslim voters. Robert, please take it away.
Thank you, Brother Edward. Assalamu alaikum. And to our viewers, I'm going to now share the poll results, and you'll hear me narrate just what those results are. So let's go there. Minor technical difficulties. Hold on one second. Can we see the poll here now, Edward?
Robert, not yet. I think you'll have to share your screen to show the image of the poll. While you're working that out, I will note the following, that as you all know, early voting is going on right now. Alhamdulillah, we have seen that Muslim voter turnout is looking good. We want it to be higher. So as you're learning today how people plan to vote, make sure you're making your own plan to vote. Social media is great. I'm glad everyone shared their opinions online. Now it's time to put your money where your mouth is. Turn out to vote. We'll talk about that more a little later. Robert, we're on screen now. I can see the survey, so go ahead and discuss the results.
All right, great. So again, thank you everyone for tuning in. This is our final CAIR 2024 election poll of American Muslim voters. It was conducted between October 30th and 31st. This was a nationwide poll, not just battleground states, but all states. And it was a fairly large poll where we surveyed 1,449 registered Muslim voters. These were name matched and by nationality, ethnicity, and we were able to target in exactly where these Muslim voters said they plan to vote for which presidential candidate on Tuesday. And so just getting right into the numbers, we found that Muslim voters, they said by 42.3% they were going to vote for Dr. Jill Stein of the Green Party, followed by Vice President Kamala Harris of the Democratic Party. They plan on voting by 41%. For former President Donald Trump, Republican Party, 9.8% of Muslim voters said that they would be voting for him. For another third-party candidate, Libertarian Party presidential candidate Chase Oliver, just 0.6%. And Dr. Cornel West of the Justice Party, just 0.1%. And there was also just a 0.9% undecided still. It seems like Muslim voters really do know who they now will be voting for in this election. And we only had 5.4% of registered Muslim voters respond that they did not plan to vote. So this is an actual excellent score where more than 90% of Muslim voters are going to be turning out to the polls or have already voted. And again, just looking at this polling data, because it was a large-scale survey, we had a confidence interval of 95% and a margin of error of 2.5 percentage points. And so this is a pretty spot-on survey representing the voting trends of Muslim voters. So again, this is more of a race between Jill Stein and Kamala Harris in the Muslim community, followed by other candidates. And I would just note that this survey was conducted by third party. We were using the survey vendor Molitico, and we appreciate their good analysis and support in developing this survey. Now, I just want to also share the results of our prior August survey just as a point of comparison. And I think I've now figured out how to present on here. So we're just going to go there too. Hold on 1 second. And so as we can see, back in August, where CAIR conducted a very similar survey, at that time, Kamala Harris had 29.4% of the Muslim vote, and Jill Stein had 29.1% of the Muslim vote, with Donald Trump having about 11.2 and Cornel West having 4.2, and there being this larger block of undecided, which was 16.5, and then not voting, which was a little bit higher back in August, 8.8. Now, just as some context, CAIR conducted this survey immediately following the Democratic National Convention, where Kamala Harris was then nominated to be the presidential candidate for the Democratic Party, replacing Joe Biden. In a similar July poll that CAIR conducted, Joe Biden was polling at less than 8% support in the Muslim community. And so, based on these numbers, the Muslim community still remains evenly divided between Stein and Harris, where back then it was 29% each, with Harris leading. And now with this current survey, 42% saying they're supporting Stein and 41% supporting Harris. Now I'm going to stop sharing this screen, and I kind of want to just get a little bit into the analysis of this data. And for that, we have, again, our brother and National Deputy Director, Edward Mitchell.
Well, again, thank you, Robert, for releasing those results. Thank you to our outside vendor. It's very important to understand where American Muslims stand as the selection approaches. So a few things I think stand out, Robert, and I'd love to get your feedback on this. So number one, it's a good thing that so many American Muslims say they plan to vote. Putting aside who they're voting for, we want people to turn out to vote. And the fact that 95% of respondents said they are voting, have voted, or plan to vote, that's a very good thing. However, when you ask people in a poll, do you plan to vote? Of course, most people are going to say, yes, of course I plan to vote. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the reality. And so the thing I want to emphasize first and foremost is the importance of turning out to vote. Today is the last day of early voting for most states across the country. Some may do Saturday, but most it's today. So you've got to turn out to vote. Don't wait for the lines on Tuesday. Turn out to vote now. The American Muslim community has a huge role to play in this election, especially in key swing states across the country. And so for us to sit on the sidelines, it's not going to change anything, right? We are all paying tax to this government. I don't care how upset you are at the government, how disillusioned you are part of what is happening here and abroad. And so it's better to influence what's being done with your money rather than sit on the sidelines. So we are aware many voters are disillusioned, are upset about the options. It is still so important for you to turn out to vote, not only at the presidential level, but in those down ballot races for Congress, city council, school board, right? All these things have their level of importance. And so we are seeing some of the early voting numbers come in from states across the country. Alhamdulillah, we're seeing a large number of Muslim voters turning out. Robert, I think you said across swing states, it's been 250,000 Muslim voters who have turned out so far. Is that correct?
Yes, based on name match data, where we look at Muslim voters that have casted early ballots and were registered with states, we're seeing about 250,000 Muslim voters. But you have to remember, we have 2.5 million or more registered Muslim voters across the country. Now, I'm one of those voters that didn't vote early. I've been busy cracking away at this survey, but I do plan on voting on Tuesday. I'll be shooting a video while I go to the polls for CAIR. That's also part of the plan. But it's incredibly important that for our community to be listened to by candidates or by those who win, they have to understand that we as a community turn out to vote in high numbers. And you're right that the percentage of 95% of Muslim voters indicating they'll turn out to vote won't necessarily translate to that unless they dig deep and they go out and they vote on Tuesday.
Absolutely. And look, we've seen, earlier in this year during the Democratic primaries, we saw a large number of Muslims turning out to vote. Some were voting for candidates, some were voting uncommitted, but there was large turnout. But then in the primaries, in some states, we saw very small, low Muslim turnout in cities that have a lot of Muslims in them, including Dearborn in Michigan. And so what we want to see is Muslim voters across the country turning out to vote at maximum numbers. Again, no matter who you're voting for, doesn't matter. Harris, Trump, Stein, West, Oliver, whatever. Make sure you are turning out to vote up and down the ballot. So that's the first thing I want to say. Second thing is that it's surprising, I think, Robert, to see that the race is pretty static. You know, in your last poll in August, it showed 29% for Harris, 29% for Stein. And our poll today has 42% for Dr. Stein and 41% for Vice President Harris. So both have, it seems, increased their support in the Muslim community as undecided voters came off the fence and made a decision, but they're still about tied. And so, as you said, it seems this really is not a race within Muslim voters, among Muslim voters, not a race between Kamala Harris and Jill Stein. It's between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. It's really a race between Kamala Harris and Jill Stein, according to this poll. And so that's fascinating because never before have we seen a third-party candidate receiving that level of support from Muslim voters in a presidential election. And I think that goes to show once again the significant role that the Gaza genocide concern is playing among American Muslim voters. In that poll we did in August, Robert, I believe Gaza was the top issue for American Muslims. So the top issue.
It was. And so looking at domestic priorities, we did put humanitarian concerns there, and humanitarian was the #1 concern, then followed by religious freedom, civil rights, and then more kitchen table issues like education, the economy. But when we dived into that poll and we looked at the specific foreign policy concerns of the Muslim community, it was #1 Gaza. And I'm sure if we did that again, it would be Gaza and Lebanon, then followed by, the plight of Uyghur Muslims and also the safety of Muslims in India. But again, this is a seismic shift of Muslim voter realignment. Back in 2000, we saw that a slight majority of Muslim voters supported George Bush. We have a lot of Muslim voters in Florida. That could have been a deciding factor down there. And now, 2 years later, from 2000 to 2002, we saw Muslim voters realign with the Democratic Party for quite some time. Now, when we look at this polling, this is only presidential race polling. Again, 42% of Muslim voters, the majority of Muslim voters supporting a third-party candidate is incredibly interesting. When we look at down ballot for congressional races, it would be really interesting to do follow-up surveys or, focus sessions to find out if that translated all the way down or how different were Muslim voters voting for candidates at the congressional level or local level for third party. But this is definitely a very interesting phenomenon in the Muslim community, and it just shows that in such polarizing times, Muslim voters are looking at other electoral strategies to voice themselves.
Yeah. And absolutely. And we'll be curious to see, obviously, 4 years from now in 2028, when you have a completely different election, maybe the situation overseas is different, where the community stands, at that time, because right now this is a very unique situation we're in. And I think that's playing a role in what we're seeing in terms of the Muslim voter preference being split between a major party presidential candidate and a third party candidate. And then last thing I want to highlight there is President Trump's support. So in our exit poll back in 2020, Robert, I believe that Donald Trump got about 17% of the American Muslim vote, which surprised some people at the time. But there are a significant number of Muslims who identify as Republican. And this year, we're showing right now, I believe, is at 9%, 9.8% in our final poll. He was at 11% back in August. And so I know there's been a lot of attention paid in recent weeks to the idea that President Trump is making, an effort to reach out to Muslim voters, and he has done that. His numbers, though, appear to be about the same now as they were back in August, about 9%, 10% now, about 11% in August. So that seems relatively stable in terms of the vote. It's really the movement we've seen is with Stein and Harris. And then also I would note that Cornel West seems to be not playing a major role anymore in terms of the vote support he's getting. I suspect, Robert, that's probably because, the infrastructure that he didn't have to run the same campaign that Jill Stein ran or Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, that might be why he's not, taken off the way that he might have if he'd been the nominee of the Green Party or some other more entrenched party. So he's showing up, but his numbers have certainly dropped since our August poll. And then the last thing I would know, Robert, is that we have almost no undecided voters. No one is saying they're undecided at this point, whereas we did have undecided voters.
Which is unique.
back in August. Yeah. So it seems like people have essentially made up their mind. And it seems like, Robert, they were waiting, even back in August after the DNC. We'd already had the RNC convention, DNC convention. So the options were clear. And yet Muslim voters were still holding back, not making a commitment yet, many of them. But now it seems they've made a decision, and it seems like it's going to be between Jill Stein and Kamala Harris if this poll holds up on Election Day. So with that, Robert, I want to turn it back to you and tell us about, not only the importance of people turning out to vote, but where they can get some resources to help them as they're going to the polls, whether it's, checking their registration, the voter guide that we provided. Give us some of those resources that CAIR is making available to Muslim voters.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Edward. So CAIR has invested a lot of time and resources in a website called Muslims.vote, and I'll pull that up in a second. But Muslims.vote includes a presidential voting guide, a congressional scorecard, and a 50-state voter registration and election date list that includes links to everyone's state secretary, where they can then look up their polling station data, their voter registration data. And so I'm just going to share that website one more time. But Muslims.vote is CAIR's #1 website. And if you actually went on Google and you looked up Muslim voters, this is usually the #1 search result. And as you can see, we just had 3 days left. But we include promotional videos encouraging Muslims to vote, analysis from CAIR surveys, our presidential voter guide, once again, our congressional scorecard. And we also have a Know Your Rights section, which is incredibly important because we are concerned about the issue of voter intimidation. And you don't have to be intimidated if you know your rights. And so with that, I would encourage everyone to visit our website, Muslims.vote. It's an incredible community resource. And it definitely will allow you to check your voter registration status and find your polling locations.
Absolutely. Thank you, Robert.
And also be on the lookout. Some of you voters that haven't voted yet might get a text message over the weekend. We plan on texting over 400,000 Muslim voters across the country that haven't yet voted across the country. And so you might receive a text from CAIR.
Absolutely. A few more things to know, Robert. Some questions we've got in the comments. So one of the questions is, what about the swing states? So Robert, if you can maybe pull up the swing state numbers from our August poll so we can show what those were. This poll right now, the only thing we're sharing right now that we have ready is the national polling numbers. We are going to break down those numbers over the weekend, God willing, so we can give you a little more detail about swing states and race and gender and all that. But we wanted to get you the top line number now since we just completed the survey last night. So
absolutely.
All we're really saying is that top line number, but hopefully by this weekend or Monday, you'll get more details in terms of the breakdown of those numbers. Now, back in August when we did the poll, these are what the numbers look like in terms of swing state preferences. And Rob, maybe you want to zoom in on that a bit so people can see it if possible. It'll be.
I'm trying. One second. I think I can. There we go.
There you go. Yeah. So this is what the numbers look like in terms of swing states back in August. So Robert, if you maybe just want to give the highlight numbers from those swing states.
Yeah, absolutely. When we were looking at swing state voters, Muslim voters in swing states, we found that Jill Stein had a slight lead. In Arizona, we were registering her as 35% Muslim vote, while Kamala Harris had 29%. In Michigan, Stein had a very strong lead at that time with 40% of the Muslim vote compared to Harris, that was just at 12%. And in Wisconsin, she had 44% of the Muslim vote compared to Harris, where it was 39%. Now, Kamala Harris was leading at that time in Georgia at 43%, compared to Stein at 17%. And in Pennsylvania, Harris was leading at 37%, compared to Stein at 25%. Interesting enough, Donald Trump at the time was leading in Nevada at 27%. And that was more of a two-way race in the Muslim community between Trump and Harris, where in Nevada, Harris had 26%. And then again, Trump had 27%. So it seemed like they were neck and neck there.
Excellent. Yeah, indeed. So we don't know, again, whether yet, how those numbers have changed today, because we're still breaking down those numbers. So by Monday, you should get more detail about the swing state status, as well as some of the other demographic information. But we just completed the poll last night. I want to get you the top line numbers, the national numbers. So that is what we have right now. And then the last thing I would say is, as Robert just said, turning out to vote. We can't hit our head against the wall enough, saying it's so important that Muslim voters do not sit on the sidelines, that we turn out to vote. And the last thing I want to say is that, as you see in this poll, the community is diverse in their opinions, right? 42% for Stein, 41% for Harris, 10% for Trump. And so as we are engaging with each other, let's just remember that, we do have diversity in our community. I think the top concern is absolutely Gaza genocide, and people have different views about how to stop that genocide and how their vote translates. And so let's all be respectful with each other, disagree agreeably, and have friendly debates about this election, but keeping in mind that the American Muslim community is united in opposing the genocide in Gaza. And we just have differences about how we want to achieve an end to that genocide. So again, no matter who you're voting for, turn out to vote, make your voice heard, ideally today and by Tuesday at the latest. And as always, we end with our disclaimer. CAIR, as you all know, is a nonprofit civil rights organization. We do not endorse candidates. We do not oppose candidates. And so we only encourage you to turn out to vote, regardless of who you are voting for. Robert, anything you want to share as we wrap up?
I want everyone to make a plan to vote. I want you to go to Muslims.vote. And I want you to realize that this election in particular, Muslim voter power has been on prominent display. We've seen all three major candidates reach out to the Muslim community to try in their different ways to address our concerns, some better than others. But what we can say is that this has been a high point for Muslim voter engagement in this election. And it's all made possible because they expect you to turn out to vote. So, go out, vote, and continue to build Muslim power. Unlock that Muslim power with CAIR.
Absolutely. Inshallah. All right. Thank you all so much for joining. You can go to our website to get some of this information in writing, and check with us on Monday for more details about the poll, and also Muslims.vote for information about how to vote. May Allah accept Jummah from all of you, and thank you to all of our other viewers who tuned in. Until next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum. May peace be upon you.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Jummah Mubarak.
Jummah.